Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is part 2 of my review of the first episode of Star Trek Picard, and this part will be a full spoiler review in full detail. So if you didn't watch it already, you might want to watch the episode before you listen to this part of the review. And I'll start with all the stuff that annoyed me, all the stuff that reminds me of Star Trek Discovery. Feels a little bit like a slap to the face because this is supposed to be a sequel to TNG and not to Discovery, and Discovery was set 100 years before this, even more than that. It makes no sense to see the same kind of stuff. We didn't yet see a lot of ships in space, but judging from the trailers and the preview to the next episode, everything seems too much in my taste to the Discovery style. There was a Zahian guy in the beginning, that same species as that queen of Zahia from Discovery. And so I was annoyed, why don't they use any of the species we know from the old Trek, why they pick species from Discovery, and also I just don't like that design. I think that just doesn't look alien, it just looks like someone with tattoos, and so it just doesn't feel right to me, that design of the Zahians, and so I dislike that. There was a shot of the Golden Gate Bridge which looked exactly like it looked like in Discovery, and I think when I saw that on Discovery I made a whole video just on that topic, and I explained and showed in pictures why it's a continuity mess, because we did see the bridge in all the other shows and it looked different to how it was in Discovery. But we could explain it by saying that maybe for a while it looked like that for whatever reason. It seemed to be turned into a solar power plant. Why would they even need that in this future in which they have antimatter reactors, which is infinitely more powerful than anything they could get from solar panels on a bridge? I guess the reason they did that was someone thought, they don't really need a bridge anymore because they have flying cars. Why would they need a bridge? But I say to that, wouldn't you want to keep the bridge as kind of a place for people to walk on? I mean, people still walk, people still run, people still enjoy views, and so why wouldn't you keep the bridge just as an attraction for people to walk in? Why don't you maybe make it into like a small park road, something on the bridge which is just for a view? Why put solar panels on it? It makes no sense. And it's a continuity issue because in the other shows and movies we saw that the bridge was still being used for some kind of transport. We saw some kind of train on the bridge, some kind of tubes going on the bridge. And in the last episode of Voyager we saw that people were standing on the bridge looking at Voyager, so that makes the most sense to simply turn the bridge into a place for people to walk in. And now in Picard we see the bridge exactly as it was in Discovery, again with the solar panels, and so that makes no sense continuity wise, and it's just a stupid design, so I have a problem with that, and that kind of stuff makes me worried about the show. Also, as I mentioned in part 1, there were scenes ripping off other movies, and now I can talk about the details. So do you remember that scene in Total Recall in which Arnold was attacked by a few guys, and suddenly something turns on in him, and suddenly he kicks their ass, and suddenly he kills all of them, and then kind of looks at his own hands with amazement, what did I do? So they have exactly the same kind of scene with this new character of this woman who gets attacked, and she doesn't understand what they want, and suddenly something clicks in her, and suddenly she kills all of them easily, and doesn't understand how she did that. So that's exactly from Total Recall. There was also that scene with the interview, and that black woman journalist was changing the color of her lips with a touch on her screen. That's exactly like that scene in Total Recall when that secretary was changing the look of her nails. We have a bunch of stuff like that from all kinds of movies. The opening scene has a piece of glass falling in Picard's vineyard and then flying all over the place. It kind of reminds me of that feather in Forrest Gump. And one of those guys who attacked that woman in the end suddenly kind of spit acid blood at her, so that kind of reminds me of the Alien movies, and it reminds me of that lizard lady in the movie The Wolverine. And it kind of came out of nowhere. I was like, what? Since when do Romulans have acid blood? I guess that's something that they added to that one guy to get rid of the evidence or something, so that was kind of strange. And also a lot of similarities to Blade Runner, the whole plot about androids being banned. And also androids are now able to be exactly like humans. It's now possible to create an android who is totally organic. So that's like Blade Runner. And also it kind of makes it pointless. Like, what's so interesting about an android character who is like a human in every way? What was interesting about Data was the fact that he could sometimes open up his body and remove stuff and use all kinds of gadgets, and he looked mechanical inside and all of that. So that was cool, that was neat. That was interesting, and yet if we now have this android character who is basically human in every way, then that's boring. What's so interesting about that? We have plenty of humans, but an android character with all kinds of different bodily functions, that's more interesting. And yet this new android character, who I guess will be the replacement for Data, will be more boring. And even personality-wise, she thinks she's human. She doesn't even know she's an android at first. And she's human in every way. She has emotions and everything. And so this character will lack what made Data such an interesting character. If Data would have had human emotions and would have been behaving as a human from the start of TNG, he would be less interesting character. He was interesting because he was not human. He was interesting because he was different and unique, and because he had to learn to become more human. He wanted to become more human. He had that flaw of his character that he couldn't understand jokes, and that in itself was even funnier. That's what made his character that good. If he was just being like a human, but someone just said, oh, by the way, he's an android, but he's like human in every way, it wouldn't be interesting. And so what's the point to have an android character who is a human in every way? I think it's less interesting. I think it's more interesting to have an android with limited abilities who cannot feel or do certain things and has to kind of evolve and grow as a character and learn to do those things. By the way, that's one of the problems I had in Voyager. They had that character of the holographic doctor who was also an AI, but I always said he always bugged me because he was basically like a human from the start. He was behaving almost totally like a human, and so that kind of lacks that element of an AI which wants to be human but is not. And instead it's just a human from the start, and so it's less growth of the character, and it's just less interesting as a science fiction idea. So that's why I don't like what they did with this character. He's just a human in every way, but hopefully maybe there will be other android characters. I think probably one of the villains will be an android. So maybe it will get better later, but I'm kind of pessimistic about that whole plot point. I did find it interesting that they implied that this android is basically Data's daughter, and it's something I predicted ever since I saw that actress months ago. I made a whole video on that once I noticed it, when I looked at all the pictures of the actors, and suddenly I noticed, you know, this new chick is kind of similar in general to how Lal looked like, and so I immediately theorized that maybe she will be Data's daughter, maybe from his memories, because, you know, they always said he still has the memories of Lal, and so I said maybe they will somehow take out that part of him and make her into a new android body, and so I kind of predicted that part, and so I guess I was right, even though they don't mention Lal by name. And they did say the offspring, something about the offspring, which was the name of that episode of TNG, which was one of the best episodes, by the way. So they did kind of have a nod to that, but they never mentioned Lal. They only said that Data always wanted to have a daughter, which is also a little of a continuity issue, because when he built Lal, he actually didn't give her a gender. He just created another android, and he gave that android the freedom to choose its own sex and appearance. And then each chose to be a woman, and yet now Picard says that Data always wanted a daughter, which is not technically true. Maybe Picard just doesn't remember. Maybe he has Iromodic syndrome, I guess. Maybe he's a little bit senile. He doesn't remember the specifics, because Data never said he wants a daughter. He did want a child, and he did have one, which Picard seems to forget, and he never even mentions that. I did like that whole part with the painting, because, you know, Data was always painting on the show, so the fact that Picard does remember that Data used to be an artist, and then that whole thing with finding his old painting, which looks like this new character. I did like all that stuff. Maybe Data was planning to build another android daughter but never got around to it, and then he died, and he still has those memories, and then whoever used before to create these new androids also created this new daughter of his, but then it turned out there's two of them, and they basically killed off the first one that we meet in this episode. They build up her character, we get to know her a little bit, what she goes through, how she finds Picard, all of that, and then suddenly they kill her off, but then they reveal she has a twin sister. So that's kind of a very stupid kind of twist, because then what was the point of all this character development when it will all have to start from scratch with this other character now? So that was a very silly twist for the sake of a twist, I guess, for the sake of surprise and drama. I mean, I guess it's necessary to have Picard leave Earth. They have to have the plot going of him going out into space, but they could have simply had the first one get kidnapped by those Romulans and taken to that other place, maybe erase her memory and then have her working there, and then have Picard go and find her. But killing off the first one that we spent 20 minutes on, and then introducing a new version of her which doesn't remember any of that, that was kind of annoying to me. That's really strange. And also they revealed that she's basically an organic. She basically has a positronic brain, but her body is basically human, even though she has superhuman strength. She can jump really high and all of that, so that's like a superhero basically. And I'm really worried about this character. She could have been good. This was an idea that I talked about ever since I saw this actress, and I said this might be neat if they reintroduce Data's daughter, who was a great character in that first appearance, but she was great because she was like Data. She had to learn to be human, and she was more advanced than Data, but not totally human in every way, and yet here it's a totally human android who doesn't know she's an android, and just has superpowers basically. So it's not the same idea. That's not what I like about androids. I always loved robot characters because they're robotic, but if you make them too human, like they're doing here, it just becomes like a superhero. So she's just a normal human woman with superpowers. That's less interesting than what they did with Data in TNG, and sadly probably will not see that again, because Data, the confirmed Data, is dead, and he only appears in Picard's dreams basically. And those scenes were probably the best part of the episode. I did enjoy seeing Brent Spiner again, even though he doesn't really look the way he should have, but I guess they did the best they could, even though I think they probably could have and should have made him look better. I think it's possible with today's technology, but I guess they wanted to save money. I can maybe accept it because, you know, this is all in Picard's mind, so maybe that's the way he sees him, because, you know, he sees himself aging in the mirror. Maybe he imagines that Data also aged, and because it's all a dream and not the real Data, I guess visually I'm fine with that. Acting wise, I think Brent Spiner was great. He seemed exactly like the Data we remember, so that was great. So all those dream sequences, probably my favorite part of the episode, even though it was obviously member berries, but they were done in a neat way, I think, so I'm fine with that. But it's kind of sad we'll never actually see Data again in any real way, and we'll get these new android characters which are not as interesting in my opinion. If they're basically human in every way, just artificial, it's less interesting in my opinion. It's more like a Blade Runner idea, but maybe we'll get more android characters. I guess it's possible. And they also say that androids got banned because of that attack on Mars, because some of the new androids went rogue and attacked Mars. I guess it will be revealed they got hacked by someone, because I guess someone didn't want the Federation to evacuate the Romulans, so they attacked Mars just to prevent that, because they were building a new fleet that will be able to rescue some of the Romulan population. They said that only millions of Romulans needed to be rescued and not billions, so that annoyed me a little bit, because we are talking about a galactic empire, and I always dislike how in science fiction they kind of have small numbers for galactic scale events, so they should have said billions of people, not millions. But I guess maybe those millions were those that the Romulans wouldn't have been able to evacuate themselves, because the Romulans did have their own fleet. So I'm guessing maybe the Romulans did manage to evacuate most of their own population with their own ships. They only asked Starfleet's help to evacuate that remnant that they were not able to get to in time. We also see the city of Paris, and we see the Eiffel Tower, and again it looks totally different from how it looked like in all the other shows, and it's also something I made a whole video just on that, to show the differences from how they showed it in Discovery, with a huge crowded city all around that Eiffel Tower, and then in the later Star Trek shows it looked totally different and not as crowded around it, and yet now in Picard it's again crowded but looks totally different from how it was in Discovery. So it's as if they're reconstructing the whole city every few years, and every time it looks totally different, so there is no consistency. And I will probably make compilations of all this kind of stuff in my other channel, in which I always compare everything. There was also something similar to a scene in Terminator 1. Do you remember when Sarah Connor was talking on her mom on the phone, and then it's revealed that her mom was actually dead, and it was the Terminator talking with the voice of her mother? And here we have a scene of Dodge phoning to her mother, who then tells her to go and find Picard, and that's how those assassins are able to find her again. I guess they're also able to track Picard's location technologically, and so that means the woman she was talking with through the hologram was not really her mother, because I guess she doesn't really have a mother. So again, that's like total recall, the wife not really being the wife, and she told her to go find Picard because they wanted to find her. And so that reminds me of that scene in Terminator when Sarah Connor was talking with her mother, who turned out to be a Terminator. Another small note to Terminator was when Picard said that because his dog is not barking, that means she's okay. That kind of reminded me of the Terminator movies, in which the dogs were always barking at the bad Terminators, except the new Dark Fate movie, in which a dog was not barking at Arnold because he was a good Terminator, I guess, or maybe the dog simply got used to it. And as for the dog, I thought it was okay, all those scenes with the dog, It would have made more sense for Picard to own a horse, because he always loved horses. So how come he doesn't have horses in his vineyard? He obviously has the space, he obviously has the ability to take care of a real horse properly, so it would have made more sense for that, and it would fit the character of Picard. Instead he has a dog now, because Patrick Stewart wanted a dog. It's not a big deal, it's not something I disliked, but it makes no sense for him not to have a horse. They should have had at least one scene showing that he has a horse as well. And also apparently he has Romulan servants. Apparently he has 2 Romulans living with him and tending to his every need because he saved them once. So that's kind of strange. I mean, I like that idea of Picard violating orders to save the Romulan population because he's such a good man, and it would also be fine for him to meet some of those Romulans that he saved and to be friendly with them. But why did they make it look as if they are his servants? It kind of makes me wonder, is he hiding them away as illegal immigrants? Is the Federation not letting the Romulans stay on their planets? Are they hiding in his house? Why are they like his servants? And so the way they made it all look was kind of strange. And also they were behaving exactly like humans. Are these not Romulans? So why did they not at least like make a small hint of them misunderstanding something or behaving a little bit strangely? Like, I guess a lot of years passed and so they became more relaxed, more human. But why are they like humans in every way? So that also bugged me a little bit. I would have wished if they would show that they have different behavior, different attitude, something different about them would be nice, because these are aliens, right? So why are they behaving totally human? And that whole part about the Federation not wanting to save the Romulans, that really destroys the vision of Gene Roddenberry, the enlightened humanity, all of that. I talked about that in a few videos. I won't repeat everything I said, but that's a big problem with Star Trek in general, and it's a problem that's been going on for a while. This was happening in every new Star Trek series. They had to go darker and darker and darker. I think ever since TNG, that was the pinnacle of the Star Trek vision, and ever since then, every new show tried to get away from that. So that's unfortunate in my opinion. But at least they didn't destroy the character of Picard. At least Picard himself still symbolizes that enlightened human who wants to do the right thing. So it's obvious they're kind of imitating the Blade Runner story of the androids being like synthetic humans. And they even kind of ripped off the visual style of Blade Runner, especially there was a scene of Dodge hiding on the streets, and it was raining, and people were walking around with umbrellas everywhere, and you had those flying cars in the background. And some of those umbrellas in the background, it looks like the stick of the umbrella is glowing, so I think they ripped it off from Blade Runner. Maybe it's a deliberate reference, a deliberate homage, to kind of admit that's where they're taking the inspiration from. If it's all to it, then I'm okay with that kind of reference, that kind of small homage. But if they rip off the entire plot lines, if they rip off entire dialogues, then that's plagiarism. So it all depends on how much exactly they take from it. If it's only like a small inspiration, a small homage, that's okay in my opinion. And I felt like there were a lot of moments like that that seemed to be inspired by all kinds of other movies. For example, in that dream sequence in the beginning, when Picard is about to wake up and everything starts shaking and eventually explodes. And so that seems very similar to some of the scenes in Inception. Whenever someone would say, the dream is collapsing and everything starts shaking and falling apart and exploding. So I think that might have been inspired by that. And also it's similar to Terminator 2, when Sarah was having those nightmares of the nuclear war. And then the shockwave hits her and she explodes, and so that's like Picard's dream. Also in that scene of that alien I complained about, that Zahian alien, he had double eyelids. He had like internal eyelids from the sides, and that reminds me of that scene in Men in Black 1, when Will Smith was chasing around some alien and then noticed that he blinks twice. He blinks with a second pair of eyelids on the inside of the eye from the sides, and so it's obviously similar. But most noticeably, I think, were the similarities with Total Recall, which reminds me that in Star Trek Discovery they also had scenes very similar to that. All the stuff with the holograms in Discovery and the holographic mirrors and all of that was similar to what we saw in Total Recall. And also there was an episode in the Mirror Universe about some rebels who are hiding and using a psychic to check whoever comes to them, just like Kuato did on Mars in Total Recall. And they even had a giant fan in the background. Maybe they should dig into books instead of simply movies that we've seen, and instead go into some old books and read them and take something that was not done on screen yet and do that. That would be better. The Orville did that in a few episodes in which they presented for the first time on screen all kinds of neat ideas which were in books but not done in movies, at least not in recent movies, well. And so the Orville was better in that regard, bringing new original ideas to the screen and not just ripping off other stuff, even though the Orville is also guilty of ripping off Star Trek, the old Star Trek shows. But they also added some brand new stuff. That's why I gave the Orville some extra points, which I can't give yet to any of these new Star Trek shows, unfortunately. We also had the scene of Picard going into some futuristic library, and it looks very similar to the Jedi library in Star Wars Episode 2. But I guess if you want to show kind of a library place in a futuristic manner, then that's how you would do that. There is no other way to do it. So just because it was done once on one movie doesn't mean that no one else can ever show anything similar. So I'm actually okay with this scene. In fact, this is one of the best scenes. I really love that part when Picard goes into his safe, and we get all kinds of references to stuff from the show. We see a few ship models like the Stargazer, and apparently the captain's yacht from the Enterprise E, and we see a bathleth, which I guess Worf gave him as a gift, and it looks like the classic correct bathleth, not the inverse one, the stupid ones from STD. This is the correct one from TNG, so that was great. By the way, we did see a picture of Worf when Picard was being interviewed. They played like an intro with pictures of Picard from the show and the movies, and in one of them we saw Worf, and he looked like the normal Worf. They didn't try to reimagine him. So that's a good sign. I was happy to see that. Also in this room we see the Captain Picard sign, which was made by the children of the Enterprise D. So this is neat. I love that he kept that. And he also apparently kept paintings of Data. And he requests this specific item, and it seems as if this room is kind of beaming it in or replicating it. So I'm guessing that some of this stuff is not actually stored physically. Instead, this place is kind of storing it virtually. Maybe like a transporter pattern. Maybe that way this place can hold a lot more stuff than you would be able to physically. And so I guess maybe it's been stored like a transporter pattern, the same way that Scotty stored himself for 70 years until the time of TNG when he was found. Or maybe it simply stores the information and it replicates these objects. I guess it's possible, but then wouldn't they be unauthentic anymore? So it's a little bit fishy. Because they said quantum, I'm guessing it's not just data storage which can be replicated, but instead it's some sort of transporter pattern. And this way you can basically store the original stuff and you simply beam it in when you want it. So this is kind of a neat science fiction idea. So this is part of the reason I love this scene, and also all these member berries. Seeing all the little stuff from Picard's past. And the part about Data's painting is also cool because throughout the TNG show we always saw that Data was indeed painting stuff and giving it as gifts to people. He was an artist, and so that's great. It's great that they remembered it and they used it to tie it to the plot organically. So he finds this painting which was titled Daughter, in which we see the same woman that Picard just met, and that's why it explains why he felt that she's familiar, because he did see this painting before. And it's strange, why didn't he simply paint Lal? I guess maybe he was planning to build himself another daughter similar to Lal but a new version. Maybe he didn't want to kind of disrespect Lal by simply rebuilding her and forgetting that the original one died. Instead, maybe he was planning to make himself a new daughter and already designed her face, even though that would contradict, wouldn't he let the new android pick his own appearance? And so that's a little bit of a contradiction, but maybe he was simply pondering the idea. He didn't really do it yet, but it was somewhere in his brain. And then when Maddox was starting to mess around with B4's memories, maybe he extracted that piece and then built this new daughter, which maybe Data was virtually working on. Maybe he was thinking about it. And Maddox simply took that idea and put it into practice to create this new character who is similar to Lal but is not. And part of me wishes that they simply would have said this is Lal, because Data did have the memories of Lal, so that would make sense. On the other hand, that might be a little bit disrespectful to the original character, just making kind of a semi-imitation of her. So maybe a brand new character who is similar but different is the best option. So overall I liked all of this part of the plot, and hopefully maybe Data will appear in some form later on, not just as a dream. Maybe Picard somehow accesses his actual memories, his actual personality, and maybe project Data as a hologram, and we'll get to see him interact with Picard for real, and then eventually maybe download himself into the body of this new android, and that way kind of pass the torch to her, but first have a real conversation with Picard about something important maybe. So I'm hoping that later on in this season he will get to talk with the essence of Data, not just as a dream, but as some sort of hologram. And maybe as a hologram he can say, I want to look as old as you, and then he can be without the makeup, just appear as a human, just like Dr. Sung appeared as a hologram to Data. So that would be neat, that would be nice. But at least once I think we deserve one good scene with him before they pass the torch, and not just as a dream, which is not real, and it's basically kind of, it was nice, but it was not epic. It's not enough in my opinion. We need one good scene talking with the consciousness of the real Data, in my opinion. The episode ends on that Borg Cube which has been harvested by Romulans apparently, and that other android woman is working on that ship for some reason, and there is that Romulan character who wants to get closer to her for information or something, so he pretends to be nice to her, and I guess will get involved with her to get to know her secrets. And Bruce Maddox was mentioned as the guy who created this new generation of androids who went rogue, using the body of B4 to do it, and they said something about B4 malfunctioning and not working properly. Despite having the memories of Data, he never became Data, so he's still dead. But they used his body and his memories to create new androids and to create these new daughters of Data. And I'm kind of fine with that idea. I said long ago that it would be impossible for Brent Spiner to play an android. Again, it would be too expensive to make him look younger, and making him an old android would be kind of strange. And I said that they will probably introduce a new android character, and I did plant all kinds of seeds about a conspiracy in Starfleet itself, maybe some Tal Shiar involvement, even though I don't think it was the Tal Shiar who hacked into the androids to attack Mars. Maybe it was Section 31, maybe they wanted to get rid of the Romulans because they were the enemy of the Federation. Maybe it will even be revealed that the supernova itself was caused by someone, maybe Section 31. I would be okay with that idea if they do it well, if it's not over the top villain and all of that. And I'm also worried about what they'll do with the character of Maddox, who we saw in season 2 of TNG. He was the guy who wanted to study Data in order to make more androids, and so he finally managed to do it, only that his androids all went evil basically, which is an interesting idea to explore. I only hope they will not make Maddox into a mustache twirling villain, because he was not a villain in that episode of TNG. He was definitely a shady character, he definitely was not nice to Data at first, but in the end of that episode, after that whole trial, he himself did realize that Data was more than just a machine. He started calling him he and not an it, and so he was not a villain in the end of the day. And so I hope they will not make him an over-the-top villain in this show. They can make him shady and all of that, maybe he will be a villain. I just hope he's not a one-dimensional villain, that maybe he thinks he's doing the right thing and it just goes wrong. And so I hope he will be a complex character, but I hope they will show his point of view and that make it ambiguous, that maybe he is right in what he is trying to accomplish. We'll have some ambiguous questions about all of that. That will make it much more interesting. We'll be able to debate that topic about the android rights and AI and all of that. I think that can and should be much more ambiguous and not a one-dimensional villain kind of thing. So I hope they do it right. And that's why I say the show does have potential to be good if they do it cleverly, the right way, and not make it stupid. So I'm really still hoping the show will get better and not get worse. That's my hope for the Picard show. And it all depends on where they go with all these ideas. And of course, we don't yet know how the Borg will be involved in all of that. We do see the Borg Cube, which is being mined by the Romulans, who somehow took it over. My worry about that is that they might make the Borg not intimidating at all. That was a problem in Voyager. They made the Borg too weak. They defeated the Borg at every turn, and so that destroyed what could have been the best villain in all of science fiction, but they made them pathetic and they made them weak in Voyager, and if they continue to do that in the show, that will be a bad idea. What I hope they will do is have the big boys show up. You can start out with having the Romulans harvesting the damaged cube, that's all fine, but I hope to see the real Borg show up as a menacing villain. That would be epic, that would be interesting. If it will just be about those de-assimilated Borg drones like Hugh and 7 of 9 and liberating other Borg drones and all of that, that could be interesting, but it will not be epic. If they want to make it epic, they have to show the scary Borg showing up and causing havoc, and that might be interesting, even though it will not be very original. It will be like recycling the TNG days of the scary Borg as a villain. That can be interesting. I don't want them to overdo it, but I think they need to have at least one episode in which the Borg show up and be actually scary and a real threat, and barely able to stop them and all of that. That can be good if they do it properly, like a horror movie kind of way. If they show the Borg in a scary light, then it will be worth it to have the Borg. Otherwise, I would say, what's the whole point of all of that if it's just kind of former Borg drones? We saw that on Voyager already, and they could tie all of that with this new android character. Maybe she will be the one to save the galaxy from the Borg, because maybe she's the only one who is able to hack the Borg or something. It's sort of like what Data did in TNG. He's basically the one who saved the whole Federation, because he was able to hack the Borg through Locutus, and so maybe they'll have something like that in the end of the season. Have this new character save the galaxy from the Borg using her abilities. I did like it visually when they showed us the inside of the Borg Cube. Some of that did look similar to how the inside of the Borg Cube looked like in their first appearance, and so I did like the fact that they are paying attention to some of the details, making it similar. So overall, that was an interesting cliffhanger. I'm just hoping that they will exploit it well in the rest of the series. And so that's all I had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.